Hi, my name is Tariq Nizami. I'd like to thank you for joining this presentation where we will discuss tips and tools on how to work with, understand, and support youth dealing with mental health issues. It's a privilege to have the Honorable Roger Chan and Dr. Gina Castro Rodriguez here to help guide us through this important subject. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Gina Castro Rodriguez.
Thank you, Tarek. Great to be here today. Thank you so much for coming to our seminar. I am currently the Chief of Victim Services at the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. I oversee our work with victims of violent crime here in San Francisco, about 9,500 survivors a year. But today we're going to talk about something that's very important to me, which is how to work with, understand, and support young people who have mental health issues and are involved in the dependency and delinquency system. I've worked with young people for over 30 years, including 10 years as the founder and executive director of the Youth Justice Institute. And we've learned a lot about what goes on for young people, how they experience mental health issues, how they experience trauma, and what they need to do better. And today we're going to talk about a little bit about those tips and tools on juvenile mental health and behavioral health, and hopefully give you some insight into how to do the work that you do and how to support young people. So the agenda for today, I'm going to start with an overview of what is going on around mental health for juveniles that are involved in the system, some of the things that we see, some of the trends, some of the issues that we know about. I'm going to talk about the importance of screening, assessment, and treatment, and how we can do a better job at serving young people and helping to reduce the issues that are driving criminal behavior. I'm going to talk about effective engagement with juveniles and family members and how important it is to include the people that are important in young people's lives in their treatment, in their care, and in their support. I'm going to talk a little bit about important neurological and biological processes that we all go through and how to understand those so we don't misread them or misinterpret them when young people are displaying them, and instead we can help them. And then last, I'm going to touch on some de-escalation techniques. Sometimes working with young people can scare or concern adults because we're not sure what they have the capacity to do, and we don't want them to harm themselves or others. So there's really good information about what we can do to give young people the space and the empowerment that they need in order to manage their own behavior. And each of us can do that in our own roles every day. So let's just start with a big picture of what's going on for mental health issues and young people that are involved in the juvenile justice system. We know that 65 to 75% of young people, or about 2 million children and adolescents, are arrested each year in the United States, and they have a mental health disorder. So we know that we are engaging with young people with mental health issues in a system that's not really meant to treat those mental health issues, but instead is meant to address the behaviors that they're engaged in. And that's not the same thing as providing treatment for the reasons why they're engaged in that behavior. We have a lot of diagnoses that are used in the system, like conduct disorder, impulse control issues, mood, anxiety, trauma, substance use disorders. These are all really prevalent for young people involved in delinquency and dependency systems. About a third of the youth, or 30% of the youth, have dual diagnosis, so more than one diagnosis. Typically, that's a mental health issue and maybe a substance use disorder or two mental health issues. We know that more significant needs are also out there for young people, like psychiatric disorders that affect their ability to engage in their normal function of going to school or having relationships or controlling their behavior. And some of these psychiatric disorders include schizophrenia, delusional disorder, bipolar disorder, or obsessive compulsive disorder. And these can be really debilitating for young people if they're not addressed and treated. And then we know we have neurodevelopmental disorders like intellectual disabilities or attention deficit hyperactivity, or young people that are on the autism spectrum. And these are issues that can be managed with support and treatment and resources. But unfortunately, a lot of young people, particularly those that are involved in systems, are not getting the support that they need. And then finally, when mental health issues emerge during childhood and adolescence, there are particular needs for those young people at different stages in their development. And we really need to keep evaluating both the assessment and the treatment we're providing young people throughout their developmental stages, so we make sure that we're giving them sort of the optimal resources and supports as they grow and learn to manage and negotiate the kinds of challenges that they're facing, and that those negotiations and challenges don't turn into frustration and contribute to behaviors that get them involved in systems. So the first thing that's really important is screening. You know, when we screen young people, we find out really valuable information, like the amount of violence that they've been exposed to, or the amount of abuse that they've endured, or the rifts in their relationships, or the challenges that they faced in their family. And all of that information is really important for us to know how to help them get to a more stable place, how to help them, give them the tools so they can help themselves to be the best young person that they can be. So assessment is incredibly important. And when we do assessment, we need to be using measures that are validated for the young people that we're serving, so that these are tools that are validated to work with young people, to work with young people of color, to work with kids at different developmental ages, kids with different needs. It's really important that we accurately are looking at the intensity of their diagnosis, the symptoms that they're experiencing, the impact that their diagnosis is having on their daily life. So those screens have to be done in a way that help us understand and give us information to provide treatment to the young people. Once we have that information, then we need to match the treatment with the young person. You know, our system, unfortunately, looks at it the other way. We have a treatment and we're trying to match we're trying to make the young person fit into that treatment. And really what we should be doing, because we have lots of treatment options, is trying to find out what is the best support for this young person, what's going to work given their diagnosis, what's going to work given their symptoms, what's going to work given their resources and their reality, whether it's the configuration of their family or the relational resources or financial resources that they have, or even their capacity to engage in service at different times. And that match is really important, because too often we blame the young person for failing treatment when it's really the treatment that failed the young person. And then the last thing I want to talk about on this slide is issues of special consideration. You know, every young person is unique, and they have a unique way of both expressing what's going on for them, but also for experiencing what's going on with them with their mental health needs. And anxiety can look different for different people. Depression looks different for different people. And we really need to be looking at things like gender and gender identity and sexual identity and ethnic identity and composition of family and community, because those things are really important. They can be very big protective factors and risk factors when we're looking at treatment for a young person, and we need to know that as we're working with them. Right now, I run a program for 18 to 24-year-olds where we go in and assess not just the risk factors, which we tend to focus on a lot. What are the things that are getting in the way of this young person being successful, but also what are the protective factors? What are the things that this young person has internally and externally that will allow them to be a participant in their own treatment, in their own recovery? And how do we maximize those things rather than negating them or not integrating them into their treatment? How do we maximize that and really make that part of helping them to get better? There's just a couple of things to point out here, that youth of color are less likely to receive treatment in the community. We know that from many studies. Boys are less likely to receive treatment referrals, and girls are actually better at following up with treatment, but they're also overdiagnosed. And for kids that are identifying their sexual or their gender identity or understanding who they are, they can be more at risk for internalized disorders, because they often don't think that other people will understand them or will be able to engage with them and be open about what they're learning about themselves and how they're expressing themselves. And so they often don't seek help. So those are really important things for us to pay attention to. So we're going to talk about some effective engagement strategies with juveniles and family members. Rather than just talking about one or two treatment options, it's really important for us to talk about what are the strategies that are important when we're doing treatment with young people. The first is psychoeducation. Young people need to know what's going on with them and how we actually know a lot about symptoms that may seem strange to them or may seem like unique, that they're the only ones that are experiencing it. But these are sort of the normal symptoms associated with something abnormal. So for instance, trauma symptoms. We know that people could have problems with sleep. People can have re-experiencing of the trauma in multiple ways, including nightmares or flashbacks. We know that there can be avoidance, where young people feel like they want to avoid anything that will remind them of the event or re-trigger the event for them. These are all normal symptoms in this abnormal situation of having experienced trauma. And when we talk to young people, it takes away some of the charge and the stigma that they're feeling internally, because they think something's wrong with them and they think they're the only ones that are going through it. So when we explain it through psychoeducation, we actually help them get some ownership in their own treatment and their own experience, and understand that there are things that we can do to help them get better. Parental involvement. Sometimes this can be difficult to do, but a family is a unit. Whether there's dysfunction, whether there's health there, whether there are challenges or protective factors, a family is a unit that will try to stay together through good and bad times. And if we don't address the entire unit, we only do part of the work, and that young person has to go back to that unit and try to negotiate it, even if they've made change. So it's really important that we provide support to the whole unit. And that's whatever configuration they live in, whether that's mom and dad or grandma and grandpa or cousins or whoever lives in the home. It's really important that everyone is on the same page about trying to improve outcomes for young people. We want to have availability. We need to make it easy for young people to access mental health care. When you make it hard, I mean, young people, it's already hard enough to do things that they don't want to do. And that's part of their normal developmental cycle, that they're going towards things that make them feel good, towards things that give them rewards, and trying to avoid things that don't feel good and things that they don't want to do. So we want to work with that developmental stage, and we want to make things easy and accessible for them. And we also want to be, we want to be mindful that what's accessible and easy for an adult is very different than what's accessible and easy for a young person. And that we're not creating services and treatment for adults, we're creating it for young people, and that we really need their input in what will help them engage. We want to have lots of treatment options. If we only have one treatment option and it is norm to work with a small segment of the population, then it's not just that the other people that fall out of that range don't get services. It's that, sometimes these are very high stakes for them. It could mean incarceration. It could mean out of home placement. It could mean further involvement in the juvenile justice system. So we need more options for young people, because people respond to different kinds of treatment. People engage in different kinds of things, and we need to have a variety of ways for young people to improve their mental health. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how they get there. It just matters that they get there. So we have to have lots of options for them. And we want to mitigate barriers that we know about young people. We want to explore the barriers that we don't know. So we want to be practical about transportation and fees, providing services in their own language. Using interpreters is sometimes a necessity. It is not ideal for working with young people in trying to help them understand what's going on for them psychologically and getting treatment. So when we do that, we add another barrier for them and another milestone or another barrier for them to try to overcome in order to get better. We want to think about cultural competency. Who's providing the services? What do they know about working with diverse young people? What do they know about people's experiences? This is really important, because that's one of the first hurdles young people get past is, do you see me? Do you understand me? Are you like me? That's really what we're doing in adolescent development, is trying to find our people. And we have to do this in mental health also. Also, we have to acknowledge that there is, stigma and fear and concerns about privacy, and they may not have had good experiences with mental health, particularly, if it's been something that they've engaged in or their family members have engaged in. And it's our job to get past those stigmas and fears, because what we're going to do and what we want to do is really important, but we also have to acknowledge that those things are very real for people. We also want to have realistic expectations. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a young person and, 6 weeks into treatment, someone's asked if everything is better now, or a parent has said things haven't changed yet. look, these behaviors and these decisions get there slowly, and changing it takes time, and building trust takes time. And so we have to have realistic expectations about not only what the treatment will be able to provide, but how we're going to get there and how long it will take. And then the last thing, just working with any young people, we constantly have to remind ourselves that positive reinforcement is stronger than negative reinforcement. That young people are discovering who they are, and they're trying to find what they're good at and find where they feel like they fit in. And we can contribute to that by giving them positive reinforcement when they're making good decisions, or even making steps towards good decisions, or working towards change, or trying things out, because that's how they get to success, is to have small little achievements on their way to getting to a larger achievement. And that's absolutely the job of mental health providers, but it's not often seen as something that we should be doing. I'm going to talk a little bit just about what's going on neurologically for young people. So you've probably heard by now a lot of research that we have about the adolescent brain continuing to develop until about the end of the 24th year. So we have lots of verification that is absolutely what is happening, and that the brain actually has the capacity to continue developing all the way through life until the end of life. But for young people, they are in one of the most rapid periods of development between the ages of 12 or 13 and 24 that we're going to go through in our entire life. The only other period that is comparable is right after birth. A child is born with 100 billion neurons in their brain, and those neurons are going to start making the connections right away through experience. Well, when an adolescent is between the ages of, say, 12 and 24, they're starting to have capacity to engage in lots of experiences that they weren't able to before. And that's because another part of their brain is further developing, the front part of the brain, or the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe of our brain is the executive function part of the brain, the part of the brain that allows us to make decisions and set goals and put things in a hierarchy and weigh information and start or stop a behavior, or consider other people's feelings, or gauge people's reactions. Those are really higher order thinking processes that adolescents are beginning to come into the ability to understand and to integrate into their behavior, to their decision making, to their everyday relationships. And it's really important that we understand that capacity is both a challenge and a benefit to them. So the challenge is that when they're starting to have that higher order of thinking, that part of the brain is really reacting to things that put them a little bit at risk, like their reward center of their brain is very active during that time. They are going towards things that make them feel good. They're trying to actually ignite that feeling of feeling competent, of feeling powerful, of feeling loved. And so they're going to go towards things that make them feel that way. It can be good things, but it can also be bad things. The second thing is that during that development, they're starting to understand what they have capacity for, but because they don't have experience yet, and because they don't have context yet, sometimes they overestimate their capacity to make a decision, or the capacity to manage a process, or engage in something that maybe they really don't have the experience to, but it feels like they have that power. And so they're trying it out. They're trying out being adults. So those things are both risks and protective factors for them. And we just need to know that that's where they are, and that that's normal. And we work within that capacity, that they're able to, think in this higher order. They're able to have relationships. They're able to use their internal capacity to discover who they are. They're able to engage in the world, but they need a little bit of assistance still. They might look like they're adults, but they're still learning that stuff, and they're still practicing it. So we need to still provide support and help around that. The second thing I want to point out is that our bodies react to trauma and to fear, and mostly in the same way. Most of us have the exact same experience. So you've probably heard of fight or flight, mating side of our central nervous system. It's the part of our brain that is protecting us when something is dangerous out there. So there's a process that goes on that's called the HPA axis. It's the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal gland axis. These are the mechanisms in our body that allow us to activate and be energized in order to protect ourselves if we're in danger. So what's happening, the amygdala in the brain is sort of like a danger detector. It's reading the danger that's out in the world. So it's taking in information, sensory information. What do you see? What do you feel? What do you smell? What do you taste? And analyzing that information and determining if we're safe or if we're not safe. And if the amygdala feels like we're not safe, it's going to get the body prepared to protect us. So what it does is it tells the hypothalamus, which controls our endocrine system, sends blood and energy to all of our muscles and to our extremities, starts and stops processes like things like hunger or urination. It will tell the body, focus on the things that we really need right now, which is energy to our muscles in order to protect ourselves, and don't focus on the other things like, that we're hungry or we're thirsty or we want to have sex or we have to go to the bathroom. Those things are not necessary when you're in danger. So it's going to draw attention away from that and put all the attention in our ability to protect ourselves and give ourselves the ability to run or fight if we need to in order to survive. So when this system is activated, what it does is it tells the adrenal glands over our kidneys, release cortisol, release epinephrine, release norepinephrine. These are all activating chemicals that will give us that ability to run away or defend ourselves or move something out of the way if we need to. And that's a good thing if something is really dangerous. That's a good thing if there's a bear in front of you. That's a good thing if there's someone dangerous in front of you. The problem for young people who are exposed to violence over and over again is that this system activates over and over again, and it becomes dysregulated. It starts to kick in even when the person is no longer really in danger, but the body believes it's in danger, and it kicks in with this process, making you feel the way that you would feel if you had to protect yourself. So your heart starts racing, your palms get sweaty, your stomach gets a little bit nauseous. You feel like you're flooded with energy, almost anxious energy, and you have to do something to get rid of that. So again, if you were really in danger, all of that process would be really important and helpful to you. But when you're not really in danger, that actually makes you feel really bad. And if you think about the things that we require children to do, like going to school or paying attention or working or listening to us or following rules, those chemicals actually don't help them to do that because they're meant to be survival. It's meant to help us just survive. And so it actually gets in the way of them being able to do those other things. So what we want to do is, one, try to keep young people safe so that the system doesn't have to kick in and become dysregulated. And then two, if it does become dysregulated and they have symptoms that are associated with trauma, like hypervigilance, like re-experiencing the trauma, like dysregulation of their mood, or like avoiding things because they're afraid that this process is going to kick into place, we need to help them treat and manage that so that they don't have to live with that process going on in the background while they're trying to do the normal everyday things. All right, let's talk a little bit about de-escalation. So young people can be re-triggered by things that you may not even be aware of. Often they're relational things. They feel disrespected. They feel unheard. They feel like no one cares about their opinion. They feel like they're not being considered in decision making, and that may be coming from the exchange that you're having right now, but the real pain from that, the real response from that, is coming from something that happened in the past, maybe multiple times to them. And so that's why they can go from 0 to 100 really quickly. One, that HPA axis kicks in and prepares the body for survival. And two, their emotional center of their brain is remembering experiences that feel like this, and their reaction is going to get really big. And remember, because that brain is still developing, they're still learning how to negotiate managing those processes that are going on. So as a functioning adult, we can get mad, but we can sort of weigh the consequences of blowing up in a meeting or screaming at someone or cussing out loud. We can pretty quickly calculate, using the front of our brain, the risks associated with that, the consequences associated with that, the alternatives we could do instead of that. Young people are still figuring that out. And so often they feel something and they do something. And that's just a process of where they are in brain development. And that will get better for them over time, particularly if they have the opportunity to have trial and error, to do it, make a mistake, and try it again. But when they're not there yet, they can often just sort of react. And so we need to know that when we're the adults working with them, that this is not personal. This is not about you. This is about a process that's happening for them and maybe related to something that you have no information about at all. And so what we want to do is give them time and space. So for parents, let's say that a parent is escalated. We want to answer questions and concerns as much as possible. We want that parent to feel like we are respecting their role as a parent, even if we feel like they're not making the best decisions or doing everything right. They're still a parent and we want their buy-in. So we want to keep them engaged in the process, and we want to make sure that we're considering them at every step of the way and we're not discounting them or discrediting their role as the parent. We want to offer options as much as possible. You know, when that brain is dysregulated, using and activating the front of the brain for thinking is really good to help calm that brain down. And one of the ways we can do that is to ask questions, offer options, and give people some choice. When you have choice, you have to calm down the emotional part of your brain and use the thinking part of your brain to make a choice. And that actually helps that brain to integrate better and work better together. When people are hurt, their pain can be expressed as frustration or anger. You know, especially for people who have experienced a lot of pain and anger. Remember, this is re-triggering and reminding them of other places where they've been hurt, where they have been powerless, where they have not had decision-making in their own experience. And so when we re-trigger that for them, it's really hard for them to be at their best. And often that means that they're going to, you know, escalate things or be frustrated. They're going to be angry. And so one, we can try to avoid those. And then two, if we see it happening, we need to back off of it and give people what they need in order to calm themselves down. We want to also provide parent psychoeducation and resources, because parents also need to know that what they're experiencing is normal in an abnormal situation, and that there are things that they can do and that they can access in order to help with that. So they feel a little bit more connected to what's going on and don't feel like they're on the outside. They feel like they're on the inside and have the information that they need. Then for young people, you know, really listening. Full attention, not listening while we're, you know, shuffling papers or texting on the phone or talking to someone else. That young people often feel unheard because we disconnect from them a little bit when they get to that age group, and they isolate a little bit. So it's easy for them to not be, you know, really engaged with us. So really taking the time to listen and ask questions and care about what a young person is saying can go a really long way. The second is your body language. You know, how are you? What does your expression look like? How are you engaged with them? Are you facing them? Are you turned away from them? What is your stance? You know, do you look like you're in a defensive stance? Because if you do, you're going to activate that part of their brain that's saying this is dangerous. Someone could potentially hurt you, and you're going to accelerate that situation. So as much as you can, focusing on your body language and your body position and your expression. You know, there's some interesting fMRI studies for young people that show that while that front part of the brain is developing, one of the things in that front part is the capacity to read people's expressions. And at this point in development, adolescents have a really hard time reading adults' expressions, and they often misread them as angry or fearful. Even when somebody isn't angry or fearful towards them, they're reading that. And when you're walking around thinking people are either angry at you or afraid of you, the way you're going to interact with them is very different. So we need to be really thoughtful about the way that we're engaging with them and the way that we speak to them and the tone and the volume, because we don't want them to misread that as if we are trying to hurt them in any way. Another thing is just, you know, paying attention to our pace and our tone. When we escalate, they escalate, and they may already be escalated for things that we know nothing about. And so we really want to help bring that down. We don't need to meet them where they are. And some people have the false conception that they need to be really tough with young people in order to gain their respect. That gains fear, but not respect. And fear really doesn't work well with young people because they don't see fear in the same way that we do. They don't have the context to see fear in the same way. This is the part of your life where you feel the most the most invulnerable, the most strong you're ever going to feel. And so matching that is actually not a good strategy when you're working with young people. We want to show empathy for young people and that we understand what it's like to be them. Not that we feel sorry for them, that we understand what they're going through. Empathy is a learned skill. We're not born with it. So if we're not shown empathy, if we're not seeing models of empathy and we're not given empathy, then we don't develop empathy very well. And so these young people, particularly if they've experienced a lot of trauma and a lot of abuse, they haven't been shown empathy. And so we have to really start to practice that in order for them to see that people care about them, and there are people that don't want to hurt them or won't hurt them. It's just a skill that we have to help them acquire. We want to acknowledge their side. We want to acknowledge that anger is real and there's real reasons to have it. Frustration is real and there's real reasons to have it. Doesn't mean there aren't boundaries or there aren't guidelines that they have to follow, but it means that we understand why they might not want to do it. We have to ask questions, engage them in their own services and treatment. We can't do things for and to them. We have to help them understand how this will help make their lives better, which means they have to have some skin in the game, right? How is this going to help them? How is this going to improve their lives? It's really good to use humor and redirect. Like, those are very connecting relational things that we do with people. When we connect with humor or we, show empathy, we're showing them that we see them and that we want to connect with them on a relational level. Positive reinforcement, again, I cannot over express how important it is that negative reinforcement does not work. It can instill fear. It can help young people learn to avoid a consequence, but it won't help them develop the skills they need to apply that in other areas. They will just apply it with you, and then they'll walk out and still do the same thing. So if we're trying to help them make change, then we want to use positive reinforcement. We want to explain steps and processes. One of the hardest things for young people is when they can't predict what's going to happen next. And, you may know from your own experience, when we don't know what's going to happen next, we never fill it in with good things. We fill it in with scary things. We fill it in with things that are bad. So the more information we can give them about what's going to happen, and then being accountable and being consistent with what's going to happen, is really good for young people, because they can get through tough things if they can predict them and they know what's going to happen next. We also want to give information in multiple formats. When that HPA access is activated, it's focusing on the emotional and the physical response to the fear that the body is experiencing, and it's disconnecting the thinking part of the brain. So it doesn't allow the thinking part of the brain to take in information, organize the information, and then store it away where it can be easily recalled. Those memories and that information often get fragmented and they're not linear, and sometimes it's hard to recall those details. So if we're sitting down and talking to young people about something, particularly if it's activating for them, we should also give them follow-up information. Give it to them in writing, direct them to somewhere else where they can follow up and ask questions later. Tell them it's okay to continue to ask questions about it, or continue to get clarification, because just saying it one time may not help that young person process that information and integrate it and then be able to pull it back later. So we want to give young people options. So again, options and decision making are frontal brain functions. And when we use the front brain, when the middle brain, the emotional center, is activated, we're actually helping to integrate those two parts of the brain. And the thinking part of the brain will help calm down the emotional part of the brain. So if we can give young people any options when we're engaging with them, do you want to sit down or stand up while we talk? Do you want to eat something or drink something first? Would you rather wait until after I talk to your parents to meet? Do you want to, sometimes young people will say, I don't know, or I don't care. It's just the act of giving them that choice, though, is engaging the part of the brain that we want to engage to help them calm themselves down and get some access to the part of the brain that will help them act in their best interest and be able to engage with you in a way that will be useful. These are just a few references for some of the material that I presented today. If you want to get some more background information on working with adolescents. The last thing I just really want to say about working with adolescents and young adults is this is an amazing time in their life. It is a time when they are the most creative. They have the most access to their relationships, to their creativity, to their excitement about things. They're open to a lot of things. They're learning about themselves and other people. It's an amazing time for them. And then when we keep kids safe, this can be a really good time in their lives. But when young people are not safe, this can be a really scary, risky time in their lives. And what we want to do is provide young people as much safety and as many tools as we can to help them manage the things that are harder and to enjoy the things that are exciting and better for them, so that they have a good experience and they build on that experience as they grow up and become adults and become who they're going to be in the world. We want to support young people to be the best they can be in the world. And sometimes that means that adults need to just, suck it up, remember what it was like for them, and try to adapt and engage with them in any way that we can. Thank you.
Thanks again, Gina, for that wonderful presentation. Just want to introduce the Honorable Roger Chan. Judge Chan is kind enough to join us on this presentation. I'd like to hand it off to Judge Chan to give us a brief overview of the San Francisco Juvenile Wellness Court. Welcome, Judge Chan.
Thank you very much. I'm Roger Chan. I'm a juvenile court judge in San Francisco. I have worked with children, youth, and families for more than 20 years. For 18 years, I was a lawyer representing children and youth before becoming a judge. And what I'd like to briefly share with all of you today is an approach that we've taken in San Francisco by creating what we call the Juvenile Wellness Court, which is a collaborative court, or I think it better described as a problem-solving court. This court started in 2010. There's a treatment team that includes with the court the young person's attorney, the district attorney, probation, mental health services, including the Department of Public Health, and the contracted community-based providers. And to be eligible for this court, there has to be a serious mental health diagnosis. And also, among other features, I think it's really important to highlight that there has to be multi-system involvement. Now, for most young people in juvenile court, they have multi-system involvement. There's juvenile court, there's the school system, and in many cases, they're involved with the behavioral health system. And we're also looking for eligibility that there's a history of multiple failed prior interventions. And the purpose of having this court is several. One is we're creating a different space with a different with a different culture to make it a safe place for young people who are experiencing serious mental health issues. One component of that, for example, is that the young people who come to court for this special calendar are given priority. Their cases are heard first because we understand that the time waiting for the hearing in the waiting areas can be stressful and can be aggravating. And so one purpose of the wellness court is to create that space to make it feel more safe and to make it feel supportive. Because of the multi-system involvement, another key aspect of the court is system coordination and bringing people together to map out the services, cut through some of the administrative barriers that might exist, and ensure the delivery of the right services to the youth and family. So I really, I want to build on what Gina was sharing about effective engagement and highlight some ways in which the Juvenile Wellness Court puts some of these ideas into action. So first, parental involvement is critical. And so we use the Wellness Court as a way to engage the entire family to ensure that the young person has the family support in the treatment. And really, one of the main goals is creating buy-in. It's not the court telling the young person what the treatment plan should be, but having the youth take ownership with the support of their family over their treatment goal and treatment plan. And that involves a lot of the psychoeducation that Gina talked about. In terms of addressing availability and accessibility, because we have the right system players together, we are able to coordinate services and make sure that there's a good match, both in terms of the right kind of treatment, but also in terms of thinking about cultural humility and cultural competencies and just getting, and also just region, like services that are accessible in the right neighborhoods so that youth and their family can easily access programs. It's about looking at what all the options for treatment are, matching based on the screening and assessment, identifying what services are the right amount, the right touch, and providing choices to youth and their families. The wellness court breaks down barriers and is able to problem solve some of those practical issues that might prevent a young person from accessing treatment. And something that's really important to me in the wellness court is about creating expectations and providing the positive reinforcement. We promote realistic expectations by turning it back to the young person and saying, you know, what do you want to accomplish between now and the next time I see you? What will you have done? What is important to you? And then when they come back to court the next time, I follow up. You know, were you able to do the things that you wanted to do? And when they accomplish those goals, there's a lot of positive reinforcement from things like gift cards as incentives. They might receive other incentives like a later curfew. But with the assistance of the treatment team, we're trying to identify reinforcements that are significant to the youth, that are meaningful, as a way, again, of really promoting the buy-in and the ownership over the treatment plan. The key to the wellness court, being a problem-solving court, is we have what we call a pre-court treatment team meeting. So the team members, and at this, the youth and family are not present, but we use the treatment team meeting to speak candidly about what's going on and what needs to happen. What are the barriers? What are the successes? And then we develop what needs to happen in court with the youth and family. What is the message? What is the theme to reinforce? The team, what I find really valuable from the treatment team is they can tell me the best way to engage the youth. What words matter, what has the youth been thinking about, and then we can really tailor the conversation in court so that it's connecting and that it's very specific to what's going on in the young person's life at that particular moment. And so the treatment team is a critical part to the system coordination and the delivery services, and also accountability, because we want to make sure that there's timely delivery, and that and we want to make sure that the services are working. And because the treatment team is meeting in advance of the court hearing, we can have candid conversations about what's working and what's not working and how to fix the problem. So that has been one way in which we have gone about problem solving and trying to make the juvenile court experience meaningful and effective for young people who are experiencing serious mental health issues in juvenile court.